going to continue our story of George Washington. We learned that George was born on a plantation in Virginia. He moved to a plantation called Mount Vernon, and then later, he and his family moved to yet another plantation, and that is where we will pick up today. Now, George Washington was taught to read and write, and he also learned to dance. For every boy and girl in those days had to know how to dance. One day, two young and handsomely dressed gentlemen arrived. They were his grown-up half-brothers. He had never seen them before, for they had been away to school in England. At first, George was so shy that he almost stumbled on over his own feet, but it was not long before he and his brothers were friends. He loved his oldest brother, Lawrence, most. Lawrence was an officer, and George wanted to be an officer too. So he played that he was general and drumbeater and scared all the chickens when he led his sisters and brothers to great and glorious wars. He was big enough now to saddle his pony himself in the morning and ride to school in Fredericksburg town. He was tall and strong and rode his horse better than any other boy of his age, and he beat them all in races and games. His friends said he was so strong that he could throw a coin across the Rappahannock River. At school, he was clever too, for he was eager to learn and listen to his teacher. In his copybook, he wrote down all the rules a gentleman should know. Here are some of the things he wrote. In the presence of others, sing not to yourself, nor drum with your fingers or feet. Give not your advice without being asked. Undertake not what you cannot perform, but be careful to keep your promise. George Washington was only 11 years old when he lost his father. Then his mother was not very rich, so he could not go to school in England as his half-brothers had done. He had to learn how to provide for himself. He became serious and studious and taught himself many things. Because he was clever at arithmetic and loved outdoor life, he began to study surveying. He wanted to go into the wilderness where only the Indians lived and measure up the unknown land. He measured up the fields of the plantation, and till late into the evening, while the fireflies glittered over the fields, he worked with his compass and ruler and drew maps of the land he measured. His half-brother, Lawrence, was rich, for he had inherited Mount Vernon, and he asked George to come and stay with him there for a while. Lawrence always had many elegant guests, and when George came, they all liked him because he was bright and well brought up. He watched them all and learned how to bow and converse politely. He was so tall now that he almost looked like a grown-up man. And nobody was better than he at riding and hunting. Once, at a fox hunt at Mount Vernon, he met Lord Fairfax, the richest man in Virginia. After that, Lord Fairfax always wanted him along when he went hunting. He thought so much of George that he asked him to become one of his surveyors and measure up his great lands that stretched far into the wilderness. You can see George Washington there with Lord Fairfax out hunting. See the hunting dogs? Kind of like the dogs we read about in Howard Saves a Hound. Together with the other surveyors, George Washington set off. He worked hard and made maps of the land, and at night he slept on the bare ground. Often wind and rain tore the tent from over his head, but he did not mind, for he was strong as a bear. He rode over high hills and deep valleys and through endless forests. Far, far away from other people, he came to some small farms. There lived the backwoodsmen. Their children had never seen a stranger before and were almost as shy as rabbits. But George knew the ways of his own little brothers and soon made friends with them. Still deeper in the forest, he met the trappers who lived by catching fur-bearing animals. They had not brought their children along, for here the land of the Indians began. One day, he met a tribe of Indians coming from war with scalps at their belts. George Washington and his friends gave them presents, and the Indians danced their war dance for them. They were friendly with the surveyors and smoked peace pipes with them. This was the first time George Washington had seen a tribe of Indians, and he thought their war dance very funny. But now the surveyors had reached the end of the Fairfax lands and were ready to return. Lord Fairfax was very much pleased with the maps George Washington had made. Other people, too, asked him to survey their land, and soon he was made surveyor for the whole county. So he traveled all over Virginia and got to know the wilderness and the ways of the Indians better than most other men. His free time he spent at Mount Vernon. There, Lawrence taught him to be a soldier, and when George Washington was 20 years old, he became an officer. And we are going to stop there for today. The next picture that you will color for your history notebook is the one of George Washington studying. You can see his sister there in the background, watching George study by candlelight. I think it's interesting to note that George Washington, like Benjamin Franklin, took their studies very seriously when they were younger, even though they didn't have the money to pursue a formal education. They were diligent in their studies, and the Lord used that in their lives. He used them greatly. So you're going to color this picture, and then tomorrow you will work on putting that into your notebooks and writing a sentence. And we'll continue our story next time.